And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24. And tonight, with the recent developments of Sri Lanka, China and Sri Lanka, India, cementing ties with the new president's first and second state visits to our closest neighbor, India, and also superpower and regional superpower, China, we thought of talking about geopolitics, national development, and security of Sri Lanka. To discuss all this, I've invited to our studios a very important gentleman, an academic, a practitioner who has traveled across the 50 states of the United States, taught at 27 universities in China, and also traveled to 148 countries. But most importantly, an author, educator, and a presidential advisor to the National Security Education Board at the U.S. Department of Defense, an appointment by the Biden-Harris White House, April 5th, 2024 to January 2025. Let me very warmly welcome our very own Professor Patrick Mendis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to you too as well.
Very proud and humbled to have you here at Hyde Park. But let us first talk about you. I've been just going through some of your work. Of course, we knew you, but just before the program, I ran through your profile and the kind of work that you've done. And we as Sri Lankans are very proud about the impact you make, not just in the United States, but across some of the superpowers of the world. You began from Polonnaruwa, Sri Lanka. And at age 18, you leave to the United States on a scholarship.
AFS, American Field Services Scholarship. I went to America from Polonnaruwa.
And then, since then, you've risen to be an impactful, influential advisor on security affairs as well.
Well, I started to work with the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee when President Ronald Reagan was the president. And then I went to academia back and forth. I always thought the best academic, best practitioners should work moving back and forth to academia to the real world. Otherwise, you don't enrich. Cross-fertilization is not taking place. So I thought always you have to be a scholar. And then now other side is a diplomat also. Diplomats are also kind of scholars, but they do things. So I worked then in the U.S. State Department and the Defense Department, U.S. Department of Agriculture and Energy as well.
And also the Obama administration in 2009 appointed you to serve 2 terms as a commissioner to the National Commission for UNESCO at the Department of State again?
Yes, I was a UNESCO commissioner under Secretary Hillary Clinton and then John Kerry in the second term.
You've also worked with then President Bush?
Yes, Secretary General Colin Powell asked me to head up what then called the former U.S. Information Agency. Now it's part of the U.S. State Department. It's called the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. That's the department or the bureau now manage all the U.S. government exchange program, including the Fulbright program, that's the flagship program, and then Humphrey program, and the Muskie program, and all the international visitors program, which we have already, all those programs with the Sri Lankan scholars and government servant go on to America, to my institute, Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. So I met many Sri Lankan government officials and military leaders going on some of those programs. And I met some Fulbrighters, went to US on those programs, and I had the privilege to be a former recipient of the US government aid programs, scholarship, and then I was able to manage those programs under Secretary Colin Powell during the Bush administration.
And you also went on to be awarded the Outstanding Leadership and Service Award and other commendations by the US government agencies. My question is not an explanation about your award, but how did you get so close to all these administrations from Republicans to Democrats?
You
seem to be working with either party.
Yes. You know, I mean, I was, after returning to Sri Lanka, I went to Sri Lanka University. That's where I have established a scholarship since 1994. And this is the 30th anniversary. And I was meeting with the Vice Chancellor and the faculty, and they awarded me a visiting professor and honorary fellow at the University of Sri Lanka. That's the 30th anniversary of giving this award. It's called the Dr. Patrick Mendis Prize. I didn't want to have my name associated with, but they decided to do it at that time. And this is also given, the other award is given at the same time at the convocation, is Dr. Walpola Rahula's prize. And then everybody thought these two people are dead. Patrick Mendis Prize and the Walpola Rahula Prize, because usually they was given after the people left this earth. So finally one of professors wrote an article, he's not dead, he's still living, and it was in Island newspaper some time back. So the point is that then I returned to the US on again a scholarship from the Humphrey Award scholarship, and there I worked with the Minnesota legislature under Honorable Edward Burdick, and he is the longest served public servant in the United States, and he also worked with the Democratic and Republican administration since Franklin D. Roosevelt was the president. So from him I learned, he said, Patrick, if you wanted to be a better public servant, better American diplomat, you need to work with the Democratic and Republican administration. Because America has a philosophy, which is if you wanted to be an eagle, you need to have a left wing and the right wing. So America flies with the Democrat and Republican. You can see today, we have a new administration coming in Washington, Donald Trump, Republican. And then another administration, Biden administration, leaving. It's a Democratic administration. So America going in this flying from these two philosophies, Democratic and Republican philosophies, it has its own history. In an eagle to fly high, you need to have both wings. So that kind of idea was installed in my mind by Honorable Edward Burdick of the Minnesota legislature, where they have in the capital they have a bust on him. And then I also established a scholarship at the Humphrey School under his name. It's called the Edward Burdick Legislative Award at the University of Minnesota. So it's my thanks to him. I learned from so much, and he left the legacy that I needed to continue work in both Democratic administration and the Republican administration.
And your legacy enriched by either working with these leaders, some of these influential political leadership as well as academics and scholars. Today you're identified as a leading foreign policy scholar, international relations, agriculture and applied economics. I think,
yes.
I think we have a number of topics to talk about. I do not want to delay. This is about Sri Lanka, Professor Mendis. To start off with Sri Lanka's new government in place and the developments we've seen over the years, an economic crisis prior to that, Easter attacks, and then consequences and challenges as a result of a prolonged pandemic shutdown period. Yes, this is not just common to Sri Lanka, but we suffered the worst of it. What is your view as an American diplomat?
Well, I think Sri Lanka is a crossroad, and you have remarkably talented, I would say, young generation who made the historic change at the last election. First time in Sri Lankan history, Tamil, Muslim, Hindu, Christian voted for same kind of group. They didn't vote for Tamil or the Muslims or the Christian. So this time is the first time in Sri Lankan history that the parliament is voted by the all Sri Lankan. It looks like this is the first time our national anthem at work. In Sri Lanka, we are said, we are the mothers of Sri Lanka. This doesn't say in the national anthem, you are a Tamil Muslim. We are the son of or daughters of one mother. So this is the first time I think Sri Lanka is turning page. It is not a new chapter. I hope they are going to write a new book. I think these talented people, some may say, oh, they don't have experience. But what kind of experience do you need? Experience of taking money from the country, or selling the country, or putting in the foreign bank accounts, or do you want to try experience to be honest to the one nation, to be a Sri Lankan? So this, I think their attitude, this is united Sri Lanka for the first time. They speaking in one language, the language of Sri Lanka. So I think this is inspirational. I was kind of surprised this historic move taking place. And it is a departure from the past, one party to the another party, to the one family to the another family. Now this leadership, like they are coming from Polonnaruwa, Anuradhapura, and Monaragala, Badulla, and all other provinces coming from this, they are Sri Lankan. Now they have the opportunity to lead the country. And they are young. You don't need to have a bad experience to lead the country. You can have a blank sheet, and you can create that experience as long as they are willing to learn. The problem with this land was they know everything. They know how to do things. They can tell you how the US government should work, how Chinese should work, but they cannot talk about how we should work. Don't look for the Singapore. We want to make Singapore. Why do you want to make this country Singapore? Then they want to make it a Dubai. Why do you want to make a Dubai? To a desert? You see, this has to be a Sri Lanka to Sri Lankan. You don't want to be somebody else. Oh, no, this is the issue. I think this new government, if they were to at this point, work with the new superpowers, emerging superpowers, and now Sri Lanka's northern neighbor, and the countries, they have a long legacy. Sri Lanka has a long legacy with China, go back to more than 2,000 years. I can go from the first king in AD to onward, Park Shen coming to, on Swanson visited and write about Sri Lanka, to Admiral Chung Ho, and to the current administration, the rubber rice agreement in the 1950s, to how we ended up with it, and the return of the China. So you have to look at all these legacies. And then you and I, whether you are a Tamil, Muslim, Hindus, we are, in our history said we are northern Sri Lankan, north, and then southern people came in during the British time, and all happened to be mixed up. If you look at the King Parakambahu, the Nisanka Malla, to all the Parakambaus, the 1 to 9th, and they are all Tamil Muslim, and there is a bloodline. So we are all Sri Lankan. I think this gives the opportunity for the new administration to look at the reality. And I think this is a critical historic moment. Take the Sri Lanka people, the leadership, to take to the next level.
You talk about China and the United States. We seldom hear of such unification of the two superpowers, two major, largest economies. But again, Sri Lanka faced a lot of controversy dealing with these, especially during the crisis. Sometimes the United States has been uneasy with Sri Lanka's relations with China. China not confident with the level of attention Sri Lanka gives India, and thereby working with the United States. So we've assured a non-aligned foreign policy throughout, but do you think Sri Lanka has the strength, the ability and the confidence to navigate these challenges, and especially the concerns raised by these superpowers?
I think you ask several questions. Let me digest that one and analyze in 3 different ways. First is you need to understand what China is, where it is coming from. What is America? What is India? Let's think about these three superpowers, emerging powers. China, Sri Lanka's connections goes back to the Buddhist diplomacy, which I wrote about it. Okay, Faxian to Swanson to, and most recently putting up the Lotus Tower, right, in Colombo Lotus Tower. And this has some connections, dots you can connect, why they are doing this one. So you need to know the history. And then the Chinese foreign policy, when President Xi Jinping came into power, is wanted the China dream. What is the China dream? It's a rejuvenation of Chinese culture, Chinese nation. They have two strategies at work. One is where Faxian came to Sri Lanka in the 5th century to Anuradhapura, and he stayed in Abhayagiri, where Mahavihara was there. And then he studied and took the Buddhism back to China, because they didn't have a Tripitaka here. It's fragmented. Then he came to learn from Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is a depository of Buddhist knowledge. So that's the beginning of that one. But after that one, like King Parakambahu's time in the Tang dynasty, for example, and King Parakambahu export rice. So that's why you have a China Bay.
Right.
Right? You don't have American Bay, you don't have Indian Bay, you don't have a Portuguese Bay or anything like that. You have a China Bay. Why? During that time, they transport rice to China, right? To the during the Tang dynasty. So you can see these as legacies. If you don't know the history, you don't know the future, because it's a misconception. This is best said Winston Churchill. Father's future you can see depend on what the father's backward you can see. The Sri Lankan people, looking at today's newspaper, make a policy for tomorrow. They want to be a Singapore and they want to Dubai. No, look at the trend line, not the headline. That's part of China. When you come to the US, what is the US philosophy? Why they are doing these things in the world? You need to understand the founding of the nation. They also track on the Democratic and Republican administration. There is a legacy to that one. You can say the Republican are very money-oriented. Wall Street, banking, everything is transactional. You can see in President Donald Trump's administration policies they are going to put forward today onward. Okay, these are Hamiltonian. Alexander Hamilton said that this is that's the country need to go, industrialization policies and so forth. If you look at the American history, you can see that. And then there is another group of people who are influenced by the Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson talked about, oh, they are Democrat, right? You have a democracy, what they're talking about? Human rights. Democracy. So that is why the certain administration come, they are talking about Sri Lanka's human rights violation, or the war and all this coming through. And then Republican administration come, and you actually interviewed Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, some time back. And why he was here? He wants to talk about Diego Garcia and the Millennium Challenge Corporation grants from the corridor between Colombo to Trincomalee. So this is their orientation. You can see. And why they both, Democrat and Republican, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, they only agree on one thing: trade. America must be a trading nation, commercial nation. In the Constitution, it says commerce clause. That's how all the 50 states bound together. On the other hand, China, everything is trade. Okay, whether it is Hambantota or the Colombo port city, about trade. This country is trade oriented. So what I think is this current administration in Colombo need to think about American history, Chinese history, Sri Lankan history. Well, what about Sri Lanka? If you go to the 5th century and in the 4th century, you can find the cross here. The cross in the Catholic Church. Okay, you can see the Catholic Bishop Conference, and you see that cross. What is that cross about? This is called the Anuradhapura cross. Anuradhapura cross, why? Because they found that one from the Anuradhapura time period. There are Christian and Portuguese, and long before Portuguese comes, they have a trade with Sri Lanka. In even the 5th century, 4th century. So you can ask a history of Sri Lanka, and this is a trading nation. You are not an island. We call it is an island because this is a mindset. This island is connected to the east, to the west. Sri Lankan kings have sent diplomats to Europe.
So you're dispelling this island mentality concept.
Because think we are island, we are colonial powers. Still Sri Lankan, if you talk to some of my good friends, they have this colonial mindset. We are still British. When I talk to them in Sinhala, they speak to me in English because I want to practice my Sinhala here while I'm here. So it is not a complaint because I wanted to be a better Sinhala speaker. So I wanted to be a better English speaker. I wanted to be a learner. Constantly you are learning things. That is the whole thing about the human experience. You need to learn. That's why we are here. So I think Sri Lanka should go back to look at the history. This is not an island. This is the island linked by the ocean to the east and west. This is why Chinese are here. This is why American philosophy is at work, and this is the Chinese philosophy is at work. I think if we were to understand the Chinese history and American history, this is another surprising thing. President Donald Trump invited President Xi Jinping come to his inauguration. First time in the history, American president asked America's major competitor to come to my inauguration. This is what I wrote about, it's called Chimerica, China and America together. If these two countries to come together, because their philosophy is what? As I said, northern route during the Tang dynasty faction here is a trade. Trade in Sri Lanka was exporting the knowledge of Buddhism to China. And then they sent it the Lotus Tower. Symbolize import and export. And also Admiral Chung He came to Galle and he put what they call the trilingual gold tablet, and now you can see it in your museum, right? What is it says? To build the world, build a peaceful world through trade. You can see the trade is the one that bound together. Trade in knowledge, faction come in and take in Buddhism from here to there, and then the trade in goods. Right now you know about the goods and the trade in services. So therefore we can see these dynamics are at work. Once you know the history, you can see the future.
So are you suggesting, Professor, that Sri Lanka has been talking about whether we are going to be a manufacturing hub, an agricultural base, a regional hub for information technology, a services hub? Are you, if we read in between the lines, are you saying a trading nation is what we, that's our heritage and that's what we can work and excel in? And secondly, I want to ask a few questions so that I give you more time to talk. You've written a number of books: Trade for Peace, How the Chinese Dream and the American Destiny Create a Pacific New World Order, Peaceful War. Quite interesting. You mentioned about how Chinese, the Belt and Road Initiative to the American dream works. But this is also a time we're talking about trade wars. For countries like us, small island nations as others, and the majority would identify it, and as you identify, a trading nation, to avoid being entangled in these trade wars, is that possible?
Absolutely. American philosophy, if you go to Thomas Jefferson, he said, trade with all, entangle with none. This is American model. However, even in American administration throughout, they didn't really get what the founding fathers were telling you. They entangle with everybody, okay? Why? Because freedom, liberty, life, Americans are driven by that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It is to export these ideas to other life. You have to have a good life, liberty. It is freedom, okay? It is a political science the subject. First one is a life is economics. Okay, how do you live? Second is a pursuit of happiness. The third one. So that is pursuit of happiness is spiritual happiness. So you can see the American philosophy, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness there. On the Chinese side, they have the same philosophy because China is driven by the three rivers flown by the one is Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism together. They took the Buddhism over here to connect their domestic in a local Taoism and Confucianism to connect. So that's the Buddhism come in, Buddhism is a connector. So therefore they have the philosophy of trading is the best way to people together. So that is why in that Trade for Peace book I wrote about America's beginning to end up in the World Trade Organization, the evolution. That's why the United States under President Clinton invited China to join the World Trade Organization. Ever since, their economic growth was doubled. Sri Lanka has a similar kind of ideas in the Sri Lankan history. If you look at it throughout the Sri Lankan history, you heard about in the King Parakambao's time, the rooster can jump from Polonnaruwa, end up in Anuradhapura without getting down, because that much the population can supported by the Sri Lanka's wealth. Okay, at that time Sri Lanka was exporting rice. Right. All right, you can see if you see the Sri Lankan model, Sri Lankan traditional model is you have to have a reservoir, the lake like a Parakam Samudra, and then you have to have a temple and the rice field. Okay. This is a tripod. And then the British came and destroyed all these things and put another tripod. Export rubber, tea and coconut. Okay, this original Sri Lanka's ancient development model changed to the rubber and export. And then President J.R. Jaw came into open and reform policies came in 1977. Then it's moved from the Bandaranaike regime, which is a socialism, to this capitalistic oriented model. So you can see the Sri Lanka's orientation from the communist or the socialist orientation to the Western economic model, the capitalism, market-oriented philosophy is there. So you can see this is the two things can work for the Sri Lankan people. Put Sri Lanka at the first. Don't try to be a Chinese or the American or the Singaporean or the Dubaian. So my point is,
what works for Sri Lanka?
That what is for Sri Lanka? You mentioned about in your question, we have everything that Singapore doesn't have. We have everything Dubai doesn't have. What is the greatness of this country? This is the land of depository of Buddhist knowledge. That is why everybody comes over here. Buddhism. Emperor Asoka sent his children over here. You keep this one. This is the land because it's going to be disappeared in the land it was born. The philosophy. This country kept it. And this is the repository of this. Is why you have Abhayagiriya and Mahavihara and all this, and Chetavanaramaya, that's why it's a forest right now. So we have that philosophy, whether it is a Mahayana orientation or the Theravada orientation. They had it on the both sides. Okay? So my point is, we have the knowledge. We have the ideas. What is the best thing after ideas? After Socrates, Plato's, and Buddha's or the Christ, after ideas or philosophy is people. People is the resource. Look at it, the brightest people I can see in Sri Lanka. You go to the rural areas. At my age, if I have that challenge, they speak English, they have a phone, and they can get everything in. In Polonnaruwa, when I was going up with the water buffaloes, we didn't have these computers things to watch about. I had the swing shot, Katipole, and the Saran, and I was playing with the water buffaloes. I learned great things about water buffaloes, about the patient, and some are brilliant because they listen to me, and when I was riding on them, and then you have to kick and go this way, they move that way. Then there are some water buffaloes looking at you just like getting mad at you, but actually they are smiling, but when you look at it, they are mad. So you can have that kind of thing. This is the greatest resource in this country are the people, especially the young people. All the generation like me, we are extinguishing, and there are young people are going to be distinguished. Okay, look at yourself and your other colleague and Chatura. My time, they had a people, but the new generation are much better than me. I wish I had that kind of skill like they are having right now, even from Sri Javardhanapura universities to elsewhere. And the third one is the ideas that we talk about. Buddhism is here, and if you learn and act on it, Buddhism, this country be a Dharma Deepa. That's what the Parksian and Swanson wrote about. This is the treasure. And the second one is people, right? And the third one is things, the goods, material. You need to have those things. King Parakaham will export rice and import sword and silk for his queen and everything from India, China. Okay, so what I am trying to say is Sri Lanka has things. We have over 200 rivers. Dubai doesn't have anything. Why do you want to be Dubai? Certainly. And Singapore, we have huge mountains. Pidurutalagala to Sripada, and this weekend I was soaking wet, climbed to the Sripada for 16 hours, and huge line. There are a lot of people waiting to go and see the Sripada. So I went up there because I always wanted to go there during the season. When I was at the university, I went with my friends, and it doesn't have the same meaning. This time I wanted to experience, walk with the people. So it was a huge line. So I was climbed up and soaking wet. And then I came down. It took 16 hours. And I went with one of my dear student friend from the Dalada Maligaon in Kandy. He came to see me, meet in there in Sripada. So we climbed. He said, "Sir, it is going to rain." I told him, "Yes, you have 2 monsoon. You have to have rain. You have to have air goes through. This is the land." So, "No, sir, it's very difficult." I said, "Listen, we are going to do it." So we climbed and met with the monk, and I was participating in their Karana, the celebration, seeing the Buddha's feet, the golden one, and open it up for me to see it. So this is the things we have it in this country. Other countries don't have it.
After the climb, you're here back in Colombo. You returned to Colombo last night.
Yes.
And here you are joining us at Hyde Park with a number of discussions also with the present government. I would like to discuss all that. I understand you probably, the government is probably seeking advice from you, or there is advice that you can share with the present administration. We'll discuss all that when we return after this short commercial break here at Hyde Park. We are in conversation with the international relations, foreign policy and agriculture scholar, as well as author and American diplomat, Professor Patrick Mendis. Welcome back. We are in conversation with American diplomat, author and scholar, Professor Patrick Mendis. Professor, we were talking about geopolitics at large and your experiences working with the United States and Chinese universities as well as authorities. But let's move on to talk about national development. Yes, you spoke about what Sri Lanka must align towards and work with. And talking about economics as a scholar, as a practitioner, what really works for us? We're out of an economic crisis, but we are still navigating through the challenges of seeking sustainable development and lasting growth for the country, with the challenges of wars and supply chain disruptions. And I mentioned about trade wars as well, but you've spoken about how we can navigate this. Tell us what your suggestions are for Sri Lanka at this juncture.
Before the commercial break, you asked me whether somebody asked me to advise. I was not asked, but I was meeting with advisor to the president this morning, and we talk about number of issues, economic issues, and also the science and technology issues and other things. To answer your question, I'm not asked because I'm still a student and keep learning about it, and I am here to learn from you and not to teach anything.
In 1978, you were a student at 18 years of age, and you're humble enough to say that. Okay.
So to answer your question, to what Sri Lanka do, I said, if you look at the two major countries are in a trade war right now, and I told you that the President Trump invited the Vice Premier that he's there, and Chinese President said, we will send you. So this is the Chimerican warfare. If you look at the Democrat and Republican, they are always at war. Wars, ideas. If you look at the Sri Lankan parliament and you have an opposition, absolutely you need to criticize that how the thing's going to be. Okay, if you say, Patrick, you don't have this one, you need to know. I should be humble because I want to be a better. Because if I think I know everything, where I am going to learn to be a better? So this is why you have the beauty of the democracy is there are government policies. If they don't promise and if they don't do things what they promise to the people, and there is opposition, and the people are going to have another aragale and something could happen. Okay, so how can this leadership, when they come to the parliament, they have to be honest and willing to learn and adjust, move the country. Right. Democrat and Republican ideas, and also if you look at the Chinese Communist Party Council at that highest level, they have debates. You know, people think this is a role by the autocrat, but it is not how like it is working.
How about trade and investment? What is the way forward here in a conducive environment?
You can see that the current administration in Colombo, and when he went to India, and they signed certain number of agreements. Okay, there are some are controversial, you know, that bringing in the Indian health professional to Sri Lanka, and then there might be a natural reaction. What would happen to the Sri Lankan doctors and engineers and so forth when you're going to compete? There are things always coming up. Okay, whether they are going to have this is oil refinery in Trincomalee, or the new one they signed in for the Hambantota with the Chinese. So this is always we need to think about Sri Lanka, need to think about Sri Lanka, not the private interest. This is what happened. You need to look at the national interest, what is good for the people of Sri Lanka, not to the one family, to the another one, or to the group of people. So if we have this national debate in the parliament, of course, we need to have a very healthy opposition. Everybody should argue. This is what the beauty of the democracy is. So I think the Sri Lankan current administration look into these countries, asking for the investment, and they wanted to have a trade agreement, and the US also have a investment facilitation agreement during the, I think, Mr. Ranasinghe Premadasa's time, did it that time. So government can facilitate the infrastructure for governance so the business community can survive. And the people from everywhere can participate in this is a national development process. Look at it, for example, the Clean Sri Lanka, the new policy. It takes time because they are trying to change the system. With the system, they have to change the cultural mindset. I don't need to tell you about this one. When I come back to that, what I talk about, three things is the knowledge and the people and the things. Buddha said, mind is the forerunner of everything. Dhammapada 1. So let this mind trans thing and clean our mindset, then your environment become clean. You see, when you have that kind of mindset, this is what I am saying, return to the roots of this land of Buddhism. It says everything how you need to live. So mind, you purify mind and everything clean.
To govern the country as well.
Yes.
The Buddhist way of governance.
This is the history of Sri Lanka, you know, that is why they are attracted. Even American look at it. I was taking a picture, selfie with the Henry Steele Olcott in the front of the Sri Lankan Colombo railway station. Who is he? He's an American colonel. You call Colonel Olcott. What did he do to this country? He was attracted to Sri Lanka after the American Civil War because of Buddhism. Who built Ananda College, Nalanda College? Dharmasloka, more than 100 colleges built by Olcott. It's an American who came here to learn Buddhism, and he transformed the educational system, Buddhist schools.
Right. I also want to add, I'm told our producers are telling me we don't have much time, but I want to ask you also, very importantly, national security. We've been talking about trade, trade wars, to trade for peace and agriculture, working with these superpowers, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative or comprehensive economic arrangements with India or the United States, the largest single country trading partner of Sri Lanka. How do we look at the security, managing not just the maritime interests of Sri Lanka, maritime interests of the Indo-Pacific region, Indian Ocean region, and then internal security of the country? Just recently, we've seen how India and China have been quite rigorously dealing with Sri Lanka in terms of research vessels. Is this a research vessel, or is this a security to neighboring India? With all these, it looks like Sri Lanka is in the midst of a lot of tension trying to please these superpowers.
Absolutely, this is a brilliant question. And I don't have a brilliant answer, that's the problem. But I can explain to you this, so how they think, how China thinks about the vessels and why they are sending over here, and monitoring and surveying the seabed. They can put their cable systems, fiber optic, than the old one. And if you control that one, it is what I call the hidden battlegrounds between Chinese, Indians, and Americans. Why their ships are sent it over here? Not for fishing. Okay, they are laying out the seabed. They're connecting all the way from the South China Sea to their military base in Djibouti, the Horn of Africa. So we can go into detail of this one. The point is, their main mission is to trade. So now how can Sri Lanka can balance all these things? Indian interest in Sri Lanka, Chinese interest in American interest, and the European Union interest in Sri Lanka. So point is this, just like Gandhi said, let the wind blow through my house. Don't let the house fallen down because of winds coming through. Sri Lanka sustained this legacy, a strong nation. The island of lion, why you are going to be afraid of? It's a history says so. Mahavansa and Cholavansa said so. Buddhism talk about it. And also this is a kingdom of lion. Who said that one? Swansen in his books. It's a Chinese Buddhist monk who didn't come to Sri Lanka, but he was in Varanasi, right? And what I am saying is learn from the northern leader, Gandhi. Let the winds go through my windows and doors, and don't let them blow them away. Then I don't have a house, if that happens. So when the Chinese come, they want to develop this country, let them have it. Learn Chinese and send our student to China. Go send it to our Sri Lankan student as a Fulbright scholars. Send our diplomat, send our public service people for the Hubert Humphrey leadership position. Train them. Send our young brilliant student to IIT, Indian Institute of Technologies. Okay, they produce the brilliant people in Silicon Valley. Okay, why don't we take the advantage of what the Gandhi said to us? Let the wind go through in our windows and doors, and let Sri Lanka be the land of lion.
And finally, if you can summarize in points, how Sri Lanka can, and some of the most important areas to look at when it comes to agriculture development and some of our manufacturing and services, attracting IT and tourism.
Sri Lanka is gifted in natural resources. One is the land itself. When Parakambau can export rice, why can't they do it now? And then around Sri Lanka is the resources of fish and also the wind mills. We can create the energy. You don't need to have another nuclear power station, and use the wind power. Right? There are a number of things, and solar power, energy industry. So you don't have problems with having hydroelectric power when you have a dry season. So there are a number of looking at into the resource is Sri Lanka is the people. Tap them. whether they are living in America or Australia or New Zealand. Ask them to come back. That's what your president said in there when he said. And the second is take this land into the next level and let people use their agricultural land to the most efficient technology and so forth. I can tell you about how we transformed from the 1970s to during the agricultural revolution. And then the third one is the people. Develop our university system, right? Don't let them do the ragging and everything when they go to university. They are supposed to not do ragging and other things, initiation, and let them be students, learned. Not to do other things, but we are all mixed up, all these our philosophies, the value system of this nation, why we are here, why the King Emperor Asoka sent their son and daughter over here. We need to see also Sri Lanka as a son and brothers and one mother.
I think, Professor, that's all the time we have, but some brilliant, amazing advices for Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for your time here, and especially I think we've been talking about taglines for Sri Lanka, tourism also, and
yes, absolutely.
And you very rightly mentioned this could be the Dharma Deepa. Sri Lanka has been Lanka Deepa, Ceylon, Ratna Deepa, and now Serendipity, Taprobane, and with all that, Dharma Deepa will definitely be a tagline that will take visitors by inspiration and awe-inspiring nation and the beauty of our country. So thank you, sir, for your time here at Hyde Park during your very brief visit here in Sri Lanka.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very happy to be with you, and we are all brothers and sisters.
Thank you. We were in conversation with Professor Patrick Mendis, a US diplomat, author, foreign policy scholar, agriculture scholar, a scholar and academic in economics, and a number of other positions held with the State Department of the United States. We'll see you again next week with yet another discussion here at Hyde Park. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
Thank you.